Enhorabuena porque me ha fascinado esta segunda temporada y creo que hacéis un trabajo increíble. Y lo primero que quería saber es que, bueno, normalmente se dice que con la comedia pues los mensajes llegan mucho más al público si lo haces a través de la comedia. En este caso, aquí se habla del cambio climático y es en clave de thriller. ¿Creéis que el thriller también ayuda a que el mensaje llegue más al público?
I think fear is a really good tactic in making someone listen, and I think using suspense and the not knowing the outcome forces people to make their own guesses. So one thing that is wonderful about season 1 is, at least when the first time I watched it, I was just guessing. I was going, this is going to happen. It didn't, but you keep trying to get on top of or get ahead of the show, and especially what could happen, and because it's all reflected in what's happening in the real world anyway. So your opinion is dictated by that. So I think thriller is great. Like fear is a really good tactic.
Yeah, I feel like horror as a genre is often very political and like kind of I think especially as like thrillers can often go into psychology and like the way people respond to events and stuff. I think the writers can manipulate whether that response is positive or negative and what that means about people in society, and like I definitely think there's room within every genre, but definitely also thriller, to kind of translate messages.
I think it's interesting that above all, it's certainly season 2 tackles the notion of man, and I use that male gender, man, predominantly men, who believe that they can bend nature to suit their will, that they can find a way around things, that nature is there for something to be doctored. And they say, and Arthur says it's for the benefit of the good. That's great, but there's a kind of an ego and a pride and a self-involvement, and I think that's kind of indicative of a greater malaise. I think we live in a culture of fear.
Para terminar, quería saber si esta temporada ha sido para vosotros más fácil o más difícil que rodar la primera.
Well, for me, it feels like a very different experience. Like one, it was my first like big job, so the challenges were within the story, but also like on a personal level, just like figuring out how to kind of take it on. Whereas season 2, it just felt like a very different experience because there was like a nice chunk of time in between, and the challenges were much more within the story rather than just me like flailing around. But I don't know if that really answers the question, but that was like the kind of big contrast for me.
Two was more difficult for me. In one, it was very clear cut. I mean, in one, you had Maggie's version of the truth, Arthur's version of the truth, and the truth itself. So it was a really nice conceit and very self-contained. In 2, psychologically, it was much more treacherous for Arthur. It's a very, very, very different world. Arthur in 1 is much more sure of himself and much more sure of his innocence, and rightly so. But in 2, there's a whole other territory that he begins to cross, and certainly emotionally and psychologically, that had its own challenges, which were very different to 1. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.